I am very pleased and I feel very blessed to be able to join you all in worship this morning and to have been asked to bring a word on the theme of come and see what God has done. And certainly in our worship this morning, we have already heard some of the great things that God has done. As we heard in Jessica's beautiful rendition of Psalm 66, God is awesome in his deeds among mortals. God changed the sea into dry land, and through the river they passed on foot. Indeed, as the psalmist says, the earth itself worships the Lord and sings songs of praise to his name. And it's for this reason, because of the earth's own songs of praise, that when we hear stories of how the Hebrew children saw the sea parted before them, or we read in the Gospels about the disciples' wonder at Jesus feeding the multitude with 5 loaves and 2 fish, or even when we see their astonishment at their Lord's ability to walk upon water, we might understand their reactions, but we do not share in that astonishment. Because you and I, we know that when God does these great things, God does not do so as some unnatural force twisting the goodness of the creation, but instead as a loving creator continuing to interact with his world. God can do these great things, part the seas and all the rest, because God has already done the greater work of creation, of creating all of this. So yes, on one hand, come and see what God has done. But on the other, stay for a minute, because you and I have gathered here this morning to talk about something greater still. Psalm 31, from which Tracy read a moment ago, is a psalm of David that closes with a paean of praise. Oh, how abundant is your goodness. In the cover of your presence, you hide us from the plots of men. Blessed be the Lord, for he has wondrously shown his steadfast love for me. And its final word to us this morning is an assurance from the psalmist himself. Be strong, he says. Be strong and let your heart take courage, all you who wait for the Lord. It's good advice. And yet, if we began our reading just a little further up in the text, we would have found the psalmist's tone to be quite different. I have become a reproach to my neighbors and an object of dread to my acquaintances. I have been forgotten like one who is dead. I have become like a broken vessel, for I hear the whisperings of many, terror on every side, as they scheme together against me, as they plot to take my life. Clearly, in this psalm, there is a shift. But what's most interesting about this psalm is not the differences between the despair of the psalm's middle and the confidence of the psalm's end. I think what is most interesting is instead how the psalmist addresses God in the beginning. Do not let me be put to shame, he says. Deliver me Incline your ear to me, rescue me speedily, be a rock of refuge for me, a strong fortress to save. None of the saccharine optimism of the Psalm's end. And indeed, none of the despair of its middle either in these words. Instead, the psalmist begins with what is almost impertinence. You, God, deliver me. Listen to me. Incline your ear. Bend down. It's extraordinary when you stop to think about it. The absolute brass of this person demanding that his God, the Lord of all, the creator of the universe, the parter of the seas, the deliverer of Israel, do these great things for him. Rescue me, he cries, and be quick about it. And the psalmist can do this, can demand these great things because his God has already done something altogether greater. God has already pledged to be with him and his kin, come whatever may. In fact, as an 18th century rabbi once put it, a Jew can be for God, and a Jew can be against God. But a Jew can never be without God. And everything else stems from that truth. Everything else stems from that promise. God's deliverance, the psalmist's freedom to be so bold, even as Karl Barth argues in his church dogmatics, creation itself. Everything, all of it, all of this stems from God's promise to always and everywhere be with God's people. Come hell or high water, we might say. And so, as we gather today to ponder the greatness of God's works, as we come and see what God has done, we would do well to begin not just with God's great acts, the exodus from Egypt, the parting of the seas, and all of the rest, but instead with God's greatest act, covenant. Because from that one great thing that God has done flowers all of the rest that God is up to. And the psalmist knew that. And you and I, we should know that too, because in the light of that great promise, in the warmth of that great love, we now know what God is willing to do in our lives. Anything. Everything. Whatever it takes. Thanks be to God. Amen. And now, brothers and sisters, having heard the word read and proclaimed, let us now prepare our hearts for a season of silence.